I love Paper Mario Origami King, and I have also never played a Paper Mario game before this, so I had no real expectation of this particular Mario series. When it first came out, I played it solidly and consistently whenever I found the time, until one day, I just stopped. About 3/4 of the way through the game, I put the game down and didn't pick it up again until a couple of weeks ago in order to record the footage for this video. You see, the thing that stopped me playing is unfortunately one of the core parts of the gameplay itself, and is in my opinion the biggest part of the overall gameplay experience. As much as I love this game for everything it does so right, whether it be the exploration, the brilliantly written humour, or the simple and satisfying confetti system, the game's combat is hands down one of the worst combat systems I've ever used in a game. So much so that this led me to stop playing the game for 18 months and gave me little to no interest in wanting to continue with it, even just for the sake of completing the story. There is an array of issues with this system, which when I first started analysing it I realised how deep and insidious the issues go with the fundamental nature of the gameplay loop. For those who don't know or haven't played Origami King before, the combat system is split into 3 separate elements. First, there is a puzzle element that the player must complete if he or she wants to get a damage bonus when it comes to the second element. This uses a circular battlefield split into columns and rows that can be moved either by sliding an entire column up and down or by rotating a row in a complete circle, with the objective being to create either a line of 4 enemies for jumping attacks or a group of 4 for hammer attacks. In theory it actually sounds quite a lot of fun. I love puzzles and have always loved Mario and Luigi style turn-based combat systems. But Superstar Saga, this ain't. The second element is the attacking, whereby you select whether you want to use a jumping attack, a hammer attack, or to a much lesser extent a weapon attack. You must then press the A button at the right time to increase the damage you deal to enemies, unless that enemy is a boss, in which case the A button does pretty much nothing in this regard. After your turn, if you haven't wiped out all the enemies on the board, it then becomes their turn, where the third element comes in. Defense is an almost meaningless word in this game. Where in older titles you could block, evade, or even counter an enemy's attack, in Origami King if there are enemies left on the board you just have to take their attacks on the chin regardless of what you do. Sometimes you can take 0 damage for no discernible reason. Sometimes you will take reduced damage, and sometimes it doesn't make a blind bit of difference if you block. This is particularly true against bosses. One thing you absolutely cannot do, however, is counter any of the enemies, such as jumping on their head or using a hammer at the last second. You could justify this by saying that, well, the enemies can't dodge or evade either, which actually some can do that, like the ninjas. But that is true of older Mario games, and yet we would still be given the chance to dodge or counter them, because we are the ones who are meant to have agency in the world. It's often also very difficult to notice and then remember the enemy's tells for when the exact moment they will attack you is, in order for you to block them successfully. This 3-element system, by the way, is one that applies for 99% of the time. The rest of the time you're going against bosses where instead of you being at the centre of the circle, it's them at the centre and you have to make your way towards them, but I will come back to bosses later. Before I get too deep into the combat system itself, I will start by questioning the justification for the combat arena itself. Let's pretend for a moment that, in a world where everything is made from arts and crafts materials and all the characters and enemies are made from paper and Luigi can talk, how does it make sense for there to be an enormous rotating circle as the stage for battle? I won't keep blabbering on about older Mario games, but when combat used to happen there would be a logical and appropriate background that adheres to the area you are currently exploring. This is still true to an extent in the Origami King, but the reasoning for such an addition is quite distracting, and as we accept this system and move on with it, it becomes a minuscule issue in comparison to the rest of the combat system as a whole. I'm all for innovation and not allowing an old formula to continue to get stale, but I'm sure there could have been a much better answer than this. Getting into the combat itself, one of the first and major issues I have with it is the fact that you are timed from the moment the board establishes itself on the field. The base time limit you have is 30 seconds, which for many puzzles, especially earlier on in the game, is more than enough time, no sweat. But as you get later in the game, the puzzles become naturally more elaborate and difficult to solve. Difficulty over time is perfectly logical, but without the help of accessories you can buy in shops, the time can sometimes get pretty stressful because you want the encounter to be over as soon as possible and get back to the fun stuff. But the game might throw a puzzle at you that in itself is not that difficult to figure out, yet can throw you in such a way that you get a total mental block and end up running out of time and have to spend even more time than you already didn't want to spend taking out the enemies and go multiple turns sometimes to get it done. Unless of course you're in a wave battle, in which case it could feel like it's going on forever, much like this sentence. As I mentioned, sometimes puzzles will spawn that are completely dissimilar to ones that have been seen before, whereby even patterns or moves that you have found previously are totally useless, and then it adds to the stress of the countdown, which as you get further into the game become more frequent and get to the point where I stop bothering to try and figure out the puzzle out of frustration and just attempt to flee the first chance I get. As I've mentioned fleeing, let me just touch on how the game penalises you for not doing these puzzles perfectly. Although fleeing itself doesn't penalise you financially, although it does penalise you in time because if you mess up the flee prompt it fails and you have to stay in battle, it does take money away from you in other ways for the pleasure of being able to get through the encounter. There is firstly the option to have Toads cheer you on and help you out with the puzzle or do damage to enemies. The more toads you have saved throughout the game, the more help you will get in the battle, despite the fact that you save them from various predicaments and therefore seems a bit cheeky to ask for money on top of that, but let's roll with that as a mechanic because otherwise the game would play itself. So if you're having trouble, that is one way to lose coins to the encounter. Another way is to just outright pay a certain amount of coins in order to extend the countdown timer, with 10 coins being worth 1 second of time. This means if you want to completely refill your 30-second timer, it will cost you 300 coins, which in the grand scheme of the economy is not that much. The third way you can lose coins is by failing to do the puzzle flawlessly and in time, not taking any damage before the end of the encounter, or complete other various bonuses so that you will not gain the bonus coins that you get by doing any of those things. These things help feed into a sense of not being rewarded by the possibility of penalisation in many forms. One way it could have been made to feel rewarding is if they wanted to keep those systems is by also implementing an XP system so that the player can grow and become more powerful that way. And then the losing of coins would become pretty trivial because you are still walking away with something of benefit to you. The countdown timer in and of itself is not actually that stressful, however it is combined with a move limit that is also given to you when trying to solve the puzzles, meaning that if you mess up or have to undo a move that you made just to try something different, the time continues to count down and that's where the pressure arises. The move limit is also almost always the exact amount of moves you need in order to do the puzzle, meaning there is no room for error or creativity, or even tactical thinking if you want certain enemy types altogether. You have to do it the exact way the game wants you to do it. And yet throughout the game, some puzzles are so mind-bogglingly easy that it completely defeats the point of having the puzzle combat system there at all. Puzzles will also be tackled differently depending on your ability at any given time. For example, my ability to solve the puzzles during the day after having something to eat will most likely result in more successful completions. However, attempting the same puzzle, assuming that it is of some difficulty during the night after not sleeping for a long time or just generally not being as alert as you might be in the day, you can expect to take longer and make more mistakes. Mistakes are quite easy to make as well because depending on which part of the board you're wanting to move alters which way they move when you press a certain directional button. You can also accidentally use moves when playing the game with the Switch in docked mode and have the connection between the controller and the console be disrupted by some form of barrier, meaning you're more likely to spam a button to try and get it to work and lose turns for it, or mess up your organisation of the boards. Later on in the story, when you're in the Sandpaper Desert, you're introduced to battles that have boos in them, which when you enter the puzzle they show up briefly, giving you a view of where they are and then disappear, meaning you have to remember exactly where every single one is and work out how to solve it from there. Again, much like the regular puzzles, this can sometimes be dead easy, but after a few they do become quite tricky, especially when the majority of the board seems to be boos, and so it feels needlessly hard to solve those later puzzles and made me put the controller down on more than one occasion and just let the time run out. When it comes to attacking the enemy, if you have solved the puzzle correctly, you will be given an automatic 1.5 times damage bonus to any enemies you attack, even if the game solves the puzzle for you by there not being enough enemies on the board to create a puzzle. This can then be used in whatever way you want and will apply to any jumping, hammer, or even weapon attacks. The only way this wouldn't apply is if you're attempting to attack an enemy such as a spiny or sidestepper with a jump attack whilst not wearing appropriate footwear, namely iron or other metal boots. You can also get other attack bonuses by pressing the A button at the perfect time when either jumping or hammering. During jump attacks this is so easy that it may as well just press itself, but when using a hammer the time window for a perfect attack is so minuscule that predicting the exact time when to press A becomes quite tricky. I do like how these given enemy types are an example of how the lore of the enemies is kept consistent. So if you jump on a sidestepper it will damage you. If you damage a Koopa Trooper and make them go into their shells, then hitting their shells will send them flying and take out any enemies in their paths. The items you apply in order to negate the effects of spikes or claws is also quite disappointing. If you choose to use iron boots or shiny boots or whatever other kind of footwear in Hammer, they don't really get applied to Mario's body stylistically and acts only in function, which again kind of takes you out of the combat because the images for the items themselves look really cool, and yet we don't really get to see Mario use them. One of the biggest complaints I have with the game's combat, however, which is going back to its insidious nature I told you about, is the fact that the entire game's economy and your success at future combat is tied to it. What do I mean by economy? Well, I mean the literal transference of funds from one source to another, and indeed the reason why you end up with thousands and thousands of coins is to continue to facilitate this gameplay mechanic. Let's start from the beginning for a moment. When you first go into combat you solve the puzzle and are rewarded with some money, with the amount depending on how well you've performed in that encounter. As you continue through the game the puzzles get harder and you build up a larger number of coins. Now, there are moments where you can spend coins on narrative-based objects such as temple history tour guides or accessories that help you find collectibles. But compared to what you actually spend the vast majority of your coins on, these are just another way to help empty the rest of your wallet. What you will spend the most of your coins on is in fact combat-based trinkets and items. This includes accessories to help you get more time or health in battle, and items from shops such as weapon restocks and health items. There are very few other moments where you can spend your coins on anything meaningful, with a possible exception to the royalty membership card at Shogun Studios, which actually acts as a way to save money even though you can choose not to get this and spend your money on having to do other things in the park. Basically the system acts like this. You defeat enemies to get coins, to spend on battle items and accessories to help defeat more enemies and bosses to then get even more coins, and so on and so forth. You will get confetti bag upgrades after each stream of destruction, but with the ease of collecting confetti, running out is hardly ever an issue, and so this upgrade feels much more passive and therefore less rewarding. These can have all been nullified as issues if there had just been an XP system implemented alongside some level based upgrade system. Not only would this have made the combat system more fun and rewarding, but actually make you feel like you want to complete them instead of just getting sick of enemies and wanting to flee. And the generosity of the coins that you cannot spend will be far less important for the progression of the story. Outside of this combat system, there is technically a secondary combat system in which you are faced with giant papier-mâché versions of different enemies and have to take them out by getting behind them and hitting them with a hammer before they go into a frenzy, and you just rinse and repeat this method. Although also very repetitive and not that challenging, I wonder if there was maybe a way that developers could have done something by blending these two systems and created something a bit more entertaining. I'm not saying that either system is good or that by putting them together would necessarily be something that would be superior to the puzzle system, but both are very underwhelming, and the puzzle battle system in particular becomes so painfully boring and frustrating that it makes me want to stop playing entirely, which of course I did for a year and a half. Then there are the bosses, which flips the combat around and has Mario on the outside of the arena and the boss in the centre. Instead of trying to line up your opponents, your objective is to use the rows and columns to move arrows and various other icons that clutter up the board in order for you to make a path to the boss and make your attack. At its best, it's an interesting change from the constant string of enemies with the usual combat system and is somewhat refreshing. At its worst, which is most of the time, it is frustrating, illogical, and often unfair with how it expects you to take out each boss. There are 3 different types of boss too. You have Elementals, which are the bosses you defeat in order to obtain the different elemental powers. Then there are the Streamer bosses, which are stationary tools. No, literally stationary. Not even things that look like stationary. You are fighting a case of colouring pencils and a hole punch amongst others. You even go up against Donald Trump at one point. Then the third bosses are just kind of randomly sprinkled nonsense that is later added to the game to extend it somewhat. There is basically only one strategy, however, that links all of these bosses. Because you don't know each boss's weaknesses or attacks when you first play through the game, the best way to attempt defeating them without wasting a lot of time trying to figure out naturally is to pick the brown envelope hints up off the board. These will explicitly tell you what the next step in defeating them is, but you only get one specific hint per phase that the enemy is in. For example, if you are starting a battle, the envelope might tell you to attack a certain body part first, and then won't change that clue until you've gone through that stage and weakened the boss enough. It's then often the case that once you've gotten to the next stage, it's the enemy's turn and they will begin an attack that's much deadlier than usual. Oh, and you still can't dodge or counter their attacks. The best way to respond to these is by using the 1000-fold arms power, but the game won't tell you to do this until you're already in this phase, and then finding the envelope wastes that turn and the enemy is done with that attack, meaning you have to get it back into that same phase as it was in before in order to do what the envelope has now taught you. This is extremely frustrating because not only are you not being given the ability to figure out yourself using logic how to defeat it, but you have to waste a good number of turns to gain the knowledge on what to do next in order to progress, which just adds up to a huge waste of time. It is also often the case that when you do finally understand how to beat each phase the boss goes through, you are already getting low on health because you've been chasing envelopes and the boss keeps healing itself, which can then easily lead to you dying and having to start the encounter all over again. This was particularly the case for me with the Fire Elemental. I do enjoy the boss battles more than the regular battles, however I think that's more to do with them being far less frequent than regular battles and they help freshen up the stale gameplay a bit. Later boss battles incorporate the powers you have been amassing during your adventure, requiring you to not just use the 1000-fold arms technique but also the other elemental's power too, which uses the same system in which you have to find the on switch before being able to use those powers against the enemy. By the 4th streamer, these become just as tiresome as the normal minion battles, and enemies get introduced that try to mix up the formula a bit becomes too little too late, one of which are the cutout soldiers that I fought maybe 3 times in total and then never saw them again. They changed up the gameplay a bit by not letting you move the board in certain ways until you folded them all together, but it did seem pretty rushed and not all that well conceived in the first place. They then culminate in one of the worst bosses in the game, the Handaconda. Just like the cutout soldiers themselves, the boss feels completely unnecessary and is probably the least fun to fight because its attacks are completely random. Well, I say attacks, you actually end up playing rock paper scissors with it. A great joke to do this if it was done well, but as it is, it's just annoying to have you keep randomly selecting either rock, paper or scissors until you win and then can do damage to it. Something I was prepared to give the game credit for was the introduction of the game show towards the end of the game, where you use the circular board to complete puzzles and challenges in order to earn points that will allow you to progress to the next objective. When I realised what it was, I was really excited and thrilled at the idea of having another unique and creative mechanic being given to me to enjoy. But in reality, this also very quickly became the subject of frustration. You can select from a range of challenges that are chosen randomly depending on when you tell the board to stop cycling through the categories. However, it's very easy to have it land on one of the harder difficulty options, which when you don't know what to do is immediately off-putting and leaves a bad taste because you feel completely cheated out of being able to get the points that you need. This is just another way the game is utilising the circular board system to try something new and exciting, which, as I mentioned, I was ready to applaud it for, but turned out to be something I couldn't wait to be over. Maybe I just hate circles. So how can I describe the combat in this game that simply sums up why it's so bad? Well, the best way I can summarise it is to call it time-consuming and boring. For me, there is nothing worse than playing something that's boring. This is the cardinal sin in video games in my opinion, and this has quickly made the case throughout Paper Mario Origami King. The time-consuming nature of the combat is not quite as bad as that because there are plenty of games that have time-consuming combat or other mechanics, but it doesn't exclude those things from being fun. However, as I have a real hatred for things that feel like they were wasting my time, this game's combat definitely grinded that particular gear. Whenever I was in combat, I just wanted to get it done as quickly as humanly possible in order to get back to the joy of being in this arts and crafts world. And again, that's not to say I couldn't have enjoyed the combat, because things definitely could have been different enough to make those parts enjoyable, but it's sadly not the case. Ultimately, the reason I hate the combat so much is because it hides the rest of the game from me. The thing I love about the Origami King is the exploration, finding treasures, saving toads, fixing bottomless holes, reading the brilliantly funny dialogue, and enjoying how beautifully well realised the world of the Origami King is. This is where the game really excels and is worth experiencing just for this alone, not to mention the moments of genuine sadness and the representation of friendship throughout. All I can say is it's a shame that it's taken me this long to finish the game because of the combat, having come so close to beating it in my first playthrough, but I'm glad that I finally have. Thank you so much for watching this video. I hope you've enjoyed listening to my thoughts about the game regardless of whether you've played it or not. If you did enjoy, please consider liking and subscribing, as I've got lots of content planned for the future, including a control video that I'm currently beginning the production of, and I may do some Let's Plays to fill the time between critiques, so let me know if that's something you'd like to see. Again, thank you so much for watching, and I'll speak to you again soon.